Japan marked the 75th anniversary of the world's first atomic bombing in Hiroshima. Over 1,000 people, including survivors and politicians, attended the ceremony. The participants observed a minute of silence at 8:15 a.m., the exact moment the US dropped the bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, during the final stages of the Second World War. This was followed by another bombing on Nagasaki on the 9th of August. The ceremony, which was being held at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, was presided over by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The Japanese Prime Minister said that the country remained committed to its non-nuclear pledge. However, Tokyo is yet to sign the nuclear weapons ban treaty.
我が国は非核三原則を堅持しつつ、立場の異なる国々の橋渡しに努め、各国の対話や行動を粘り強く促すことによって、核兵器のない世界の実現に向けた国際社会の取り組みをリードしてまいります。
When an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in August 1945, it was the most devastating explosion ever. It began the age of weapons of mass destruction. Here's what happened and what followed the ill-fated days of August 6th and 9th in 1945, when the US detonated 2 nuclear weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The United States detonated 2 nuclear weapons over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August the 6th and 9th, 1945. The attack was carried with the consent of the United Kingdom as required by the Quebec Agreement, killing between 129,000 and 226,000 people, most of whom were civilians. The 2 bombings remained the only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. The war in Europe had concluded when Germany surrendered on the 8th of May 1945, and the Allies turned their full attention to the Pacific theatre. The Allies called for the unconditional surrender of the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces in the Potsdam Declaration on July the 26th, 1945. The only alternative was prompt and utter destruction. But Japan ignored the ultimatum and the war continued. American scientists working on the Manhattan Project had successfully tested a working atomic bomb in July of 1945 after the surrender of Nazi Germany in May. It was then President Harry S. Truman who authorized the attack on Hiroshima. The US B-29 bomber aircraft, the Enola Gay, dropped the nuclear bomb, codenamed Little Boy, on the 6th of August 1945. 3 days later, another B-29 dropped a plutonium implosion bomb, codenamed Fat Man, on Nagasaki. The bombs immediately devastated their targets. Over the next 2 to 4 months, the acute effects of the atomic bombings killed between 90,000 and 146,000 people in Hiroshima and between 39,000 and 80,000 people in Nagasaki. Roughly half of the deaths in each city occurred on the first day. Large numbers of people continued to die for months afterward from the effects of burns, radiation sickness, and other injuries compounded by illness and malnutrition. In both cities, most of the dead were civilians, although Hiroshima had a sizable military garrison. Japan surrendered to the Allies on the 15th of August, 6 days after the bombing of Nagasaki and the Soviet Union's declaration of war. The Japanese government signed the instrument of surrender on the 2nd of September in Tokyo Bay, which effectively ended World War II.
Japan has today surrendered. The last of our enemies is laid low.
There is still much debate concerning the ethical and legal justification for the bombings, considering the effects of the twin bombings can be felt till today. The incidence of leukemia among survivors increased noticeably 5 to 6 years after the bombings. About a decade later, survivors began suffering from thyroid, breast, lung, and other cancers at higher than normal rates. For cancers, the added risk related to radiation exposure continued to increase throughout the lifespan of survivors, even 7 decades after the bombings. Women exposed to the bombings while they were pregnant experienced higher rates of miscarriage and deaths among their infants. Children exposed to radiation in their mothers' wombs were more likely to have intellectual disabilities and impaired growth, as well as increased risk of developing cancer. Needless to say, the twin bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have cast a long shadow over international relations to date. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.